I know. I guess you have to go get seats.
Full room. Oh, wonderful. Thank you all for coming. I'm Uma, and as everyone settles down, I'll just do a little dance to entertain them. No, I just want to announce some of the stuff that's coming up before I request Hazel to introduce our chief guest. Thank you guys for coming. This is
Thank you.
so exciting.
Ah,
Especially because Grace used to be a page at the library.
that's right. I thought I was a librarian. I wasn't. I was a page.
That's quickly, Grace, because tomorrow we have an interesting talk as well. Beautiful image of historic Easton. Has everybody heard of this? We have waited a lifetime for this. This is a pictorial of this beautiful town. And it's by Buddy Brewster and Jonathan Coe. And it's going to be 6:30 tomorrow right here. We also have backyard astronomy that's coming up on Wednesday. And the reason I'm so excited about this is because we have this great big telescope that you can check out at the library just as you would a book and see the craters of the moon. That's how powerful that telescope is. So keep that in mind. And we have a poet. Do you all know that there's an apartment upstairs? This house is full of these human wonders. So the third floor has an apartment, and we're using that as our author in residence. So we tempt authors here to come and relax and write a great American novel, and in return, they give us free programs of high quality. So we have Linda Maria Steele, who's going to be here cavorting with the hosts of Queasy House for 2 nights, and in return, she'll give us an evening. And that's happening on Thursday, and that's it for July. August, if you have not come for the Queasy Garden series, how many of you have come for that? No. That's one of the most magical events in the garden. You know, blue skies and really high quality music. You come with your dinner, you come with your chair, you relax, and life is perfect. So, keep this. This is at the end of August, but it's August 21st. It's a Wednesday evening at 6:30, and hopefully the heavens won't pour, and it'll be a perfect evening. So keep that in mind. It's a nice free music concert. As I said, it's like a little mini Tanglewood right in your neighborhood. So, Grace, 2 more minutes, and Hazel, can I request you to introduce our wonderful guests? And I'm going to be taking pictures.
Okay.
We're also filming this, so I'll say this: if you're in America's Most Wanted, let
I could take half an hour and not finish the comments that I would like to make about this young lady.
Oh, thank you.
It was a pleasure to have her and her sisters in class. And I think it's much more important that you hear from her than you hear from me. So it's my distinct honor to present an extraordinary student, an extraordinary lady, an extraordinary writer, Grace Toulousan.
Thank you. Thank you so much. My niece actually is here, and she wanted to introduce the book for a couple of minutes. Did you want to say something? Yeah. Okay. I'll stand next to you.
Hello, my name is Jolie Vega, and I'm portrayed as the character Naomi in the book The Body Papers. The Body Papers has not only brought me closer to my aunt, but it has opened my eyes to the person that she is. My aunt is a second mother to me, and the Body Paper shows this through the actions and emotions that she felt when witnessing events that happened to her niece, nephews, and sibling. One event in particular is when I was diagnosed with cancer. I was diagnosed with the cancer retinoblastoma. Retinoblastoma is the cancer of the eye and is talked about frequently throughout the book. Since I was diagnosed at such a young age, I don't remember a lot that happened in this period of time. Seeing the struggle and stress that my family went through in the book, this made me realize how lucky of a family I have. Understanding my aunt's emotions and protectiveness and motherly instinct during this period of time especially made me realize that I may have had a biological mother, but my aunt did act as my second mother. I'm incredibly grateful for my aunt and her love and care during this time, and this love progressed and grew even more as the cousins joined the family. Them over there. I can speak for all of us that we are incredibly grateful for such an amazing and loving woman who goes out of her way to fly across the country or just to drive an hour down to Brockton. My aunt was someone that I could talk to, and truly understanding how these talks impacted her in the book made me realize that not only did she have such a huge impact on my life, I had a huge impact on her. One place that impacted most of us was our trips to this library, which is just down the street right there, with free access to books, comic books, magazines, CDs, and computers. The library was a place where you could have it all. Ames Free Library, which is just next door, was a place of memories and a place where I could see my aunt writing on her computer, wondering what she was working on. I now know today that she was working on her essays, and some of those essays are in her book. With access to my favorite books and favorite childhood stories, the library pushed me to want to know more and pushed me to question things. Without my aunt's urge for us to learn, I would not be the person I am today. I know that all of us cousins could say any book that we really grew to love because of this library. Memories that we share were big to her, and if you ever talk to my aunt, you know that she does not forget anything. This long-term memory led to a beautiful and accurate memoir that we can now enjoy today and talk about today.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you. And thank you, Hazel. So this is a really special event for me. As both my niece and Hazel alluded to, I grew up here in this town, and I grew up going to this library, and I'm so grateful for the gift of the library. And I always say if I ever came into any kind of money, that's where it would go. And I know like the ways that people read are different. We use ebooks and people are on the computers and all that, but essentially what the library was this safe space for me to go to where the word was revered. And I could, yes, that happened at church also, but there was a way that the library was open, to me after school and at other times besides Sunday mornings, that I also felt that the library was a sort of church for me, where I grew. So thank you to the Ames Free Library, to Uma, to Paperback Junction, who's downstairs selling the book, for my family who's here, Karen Cleary, who made this event happen in the first place by alerting the Ames Free Library about my book. And of course, my mother and my family who show up and support this book and continuously throughout these past few months, as well as when I was writing it. What I thought I would do today is the subject for today is memoir as an act of discovery. So I thought I would read a little bit, a couple of sections from my book, and in between talk about what I mean by memoir as an act of discovery. And I also wanted to leave some time, so this is an hour program, leave some time for you to have a discussion and to ask questions. And it doesn't have to just be one way where you're asking questions of me. We can talk about story and talk about other things as well. This is a kind of, it is a homecoming. I mean, I see my teachers, I don't want to look at you because I will cry, but I see my teachers and librarians here. And it means so much to me that you've come to celebrate my book, and you're very much a part of me making this happen. So thank you. I also see the parents of my classmates as well, and I'm grateful for you being here, as well as my classmates. So I thought I would start a little with the author's note and talk a little bit about why I wrote it and what I mean by memoir as discovery. This is if you've read the book already, it's the first page of the book. My story is not only my story. While everyone has the right to report their own lives, I know that telling my secrets impacts other people. To preserve their privacy, I have changed the names of most living family members and friends who appear here. In some instances, I named people with a Tagalog word for our kinship tie. This book is a memoir and is based on my memories, but I also cross-reference documents, photographs, timelines, elementary school report cards, and the journals I've kept since I was a child. Still, some may dispute my recollection of events. Others may wish I had not written down such things for everyone to see. Because I wanted to protect others from my story, I did not share or write about these memories as nonfiction for a long time. Once I became an aunt and held my niece for the first time, tiny and only days old. I realized how dangerous it was to protect the wrong people by telling only the happy stories. Lies of omission created the conditions that allowed someone more powerful than me to hurt me and exploit me for most of my childhood. At this point, I've waited long enough that many implicated in this book have died. I didn't write this book for them. I wrote it for me and for you, the living, and for those who come after me. I also wanted to read a bit to connect to Naomi in the book, my niece, and talk a little bit about that. When my niece Naomi was 12, she read me a poem she wrote about me for a school assignment. My Tita Grace, Tita is what she calls me, is a very important person in my life, she said. She described me as a second mother, the person that plays with you, bakes with you, and loves you. I had not expected the love I gave my niece to circle back to me. I realized then that I had been wrong. I was a kind of mother. Sometimes what you long for is what you already have. So I started this out with the author's note in that passage because I've been writing for a long time. I actually wrote a lot of the pieces in this book as fiction. They appear in my master's thesis, which I do not encourage you to look up, but it was a very thinly veiled autobiographical novel that I did for my master's thesis. And I wrote it as fiction because I wanted a kind of shield between the story and me. And so I had a fictional narrator, and I could, if someone asked me about the book, I could say, oh, I made it up, or you don't know what's made up and what's not made up. And after some years went by and I was publishing some of that work, when my niece was diagnosed with eye cancer, as she mentioned in the opening, something cracked open in me. And I thought, you know what, I need to write about this. And I need to inhabit a narrator that's me, that's writing about this experience of feeling helpless and watching a 2-year-old family member undergo cancer treatments and all of that brings. And so I started to write in that voice, and I wrote an essay about that. It was immediately published. I started to write other essays, and they were also published really quickly. And I'd been working at writing for a long time by then. And it took me a while to find my voice, and once I found it and I got the feedback that this is like the stronger voice to be writing in, is me as the narrator, not a fictional persona of me, that's when things started to happen. And so embarking on Memoir as a kind of writing was a discovery for me of discovering my own voice. I know it's not for everybody to be writing about your life and sharing it with other people by publishing it, but I think that as an act, it can be very transformative even if no one ever sees your story, even if the only person you tell your story to is yourself. I think that it could be a radical act if you tried to practice it, even if you don't think of yourself as a writer. What if you had a notebook and or even like I write things on little sticky notes, you wrote down some, what happened to you yesterday as a practice, or the 10 most transformative moments of your life, or the 5 best meals that you've had in your life, or just any number of lists that you can make, and start thinking about and remembering your life and what it means. I think it's a great privilege and joy to be a writer, even if it's difficult, because writing is a way that I can live my life twice, and sometimes even more than twice. And it's a way to understand and think about the things that happen to me, not because I want to navel gaze and be like self-centered, but because I want to make meaning. And other people make meaning in other ways, and this is the way that I've found to make meaning, because our lives are meaningful. Even if people aren't religious or don't have that kind of orientation, even if you're an atheist, I still think that our lives are meaningful, and it's important for us to think about that meaning and how that impacts the way that we live and how we treat each other and what we do. And so even though I was really scared to write some of the truths in this book, I had been implicitly and explicitly told, these aren't the things one talks about. I felt it was really important to put them down on the page. And some of these are, violent things that happened, but some of them are administrative things that happened, like the time period in which my family had become undocumented. There's a narrative that goes on about who people people are who are undocumented. And I can tell you that it's me. Like, look at me. Like, I was undocumented. That's who is undocumented. To be in control of the narrative of people is a really big deal, and I think that it's important, if I don't have power to control the narrative, to at least push back with my own stories and to ask you to consider that, there are other narratives out there. There's a dominant narrative, and then you can look at your neighbor or someone in your classroom or someone you love or someone you run into and ask yourself how their story fits into the narrative that you may have. I think we're going to the more that we get at the truth of our lives, I think the better off as a society will be. Because to me, writing is about understanding and connection. It's about trying to show the truth of what something is, at least through my own perspective and my life, as a way to encourage understanding. That's really my goal with all of these stories. So because I'm reading in a library that means so much to me, I wanted to pick two passages from my book that are related to libraries. What libraries do is so important as repositories and savers of our culture. What happens when the stories are gone? What happens when libraries are burned? Which happens, right? Because these are repositories of knowledge that are so important that is sometimes what people attack, is the repository of knowledge. They attack the library. And so I wanted to read two bits from the library and talk a little bit about why they were discoveries for me. So one library I went to was the Missouri State Archives, and I'll write about what I discovered there. Growing up, the consistent joke I heard comedians make about Filipinos was that we ate dogs. No insult felt worse than being called a dog eater. Even though I'd never done so myself, I felt the shame of this practice tied to my body. Some animals were acceptable food sources, while others made you savage. Perhaps this way of characterizing Filipinos began when we were displayed as living exhibits during the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis. These human zoos were evidence in support of the U.S. colonialization of the Philippines. The Philippine Village was reconstructed over 47 acres at the fair, and it was a very popular site. I found scrapbooks of visitors to the fair in the Missouri State Archives. Among the many images and newspaper clippings about Filipinos, I found a photo of my great-grandfather, Captain Pedro Navarro. One lasting legacy of the exposition, besides the invention of the ice cream cone, was the belief that your dogs were not safe with Filipinos around. My great-grandfather was one of those Filipinos at the fair, although he wasn't confined to the areas where the, quote, natives performed their foreign cultural practices. Instead, he marched in the Philippine Constabulary Band with his piccolo. He was the ideal outcome of U.S. colonization, Christianized, educated, military, the embodiment of colonial success. But all that mattered, at least in the American imagination, was what Filipinos did to dogs. When I visited St. Louis to learn more about the Filipinos at the World's Fair, a man at the museum gift shop whispered to me, "They ate dogs." Over 100 years later, this is the story of us that persists. So I'll read a little bit more from, this is another passage about libraries. And I was lucky enough to have a Fulbright fellowship to the Philippines in 2015, and I spent a lot of time at the libraries there. I was at the Ateneo Library. I was at, what is the library called? I can't remember the name. Most of the libraries were private or related to universities, and so you had to pay to use those spaces, which is why I appreciate our public library system. I know I can go to any town in this country, and I do. I'll go to a town and I'll go to their library and work, and so I appreciate those spaces. But in the Philippines, you had to pay to go to those libraries. But I discovered all kinds of interesting things in this particular library. And this is a chapter called Pasalubong. Pasalubong means gift in Tagalog. As a child, if it weren't for my maternal grandmother's yearly visits from the Philippines, I would not have been certain that such a place existed beyond my family's stories. Mama Lola, my grandmother, was as real as the fairy godmother in Cinderella. She swooped in once a year, bringing dried watermelon seeds, milk candies, and stories of this fantasy land called Manila, only to vanish without a trace. When Mama Lola noticed that I always had a book in front of my face, she told me about her nephew, Alfredo Navarro Salanga, who was a prolific writer of journalism, poetry, fiction, criticism, even plays. "You are becoming like your Tita Freddy," she told me. I didn't believe Mama Lola. I could not conceive of anyone who looked like me as the author of a book. Mama Lola told me to write Tita Freddy a letter, and she promised to hand-deliver it to me. So in 1982, at 10 years old, I wrote him a letter and forgot about it. The next year, my grandmother returned with a letter tucked into a softcover book entitled Davao Harvest by Alfredo Navarro Salanga. I was amazed. Here was an actual book written by a real writer who was related to me. Back then, I often spent weekends at the public library, but had never encountered a book by a Filipino. One of the conditions of early childhood is that you must ask for nearly everything that you want. Some objects are out of reach, the ice pops in the freezer, and permission is a constant requirement. Can I play outside? Can I watch TV? Can I have a glass of water? There was always the risk of no, and the disappointment, frustration, shame, and longing that accompanied rejection. The one place I didn't have to ask for permission was in the children's wing at the Ames Free Library. I earned the right to a library card in the first grade by proving I could form the letters to my first and last name on the application. The librarian led me to the picture book corner where the shelves were my height. There, on the red leather bench under the picture window, I found my answers to questions about life and eased my loneliness. The library was a gift from the Ames family, who made their fortune manufacturing shovels, and I accepted this gift every week. As my mother waited, parked out front, I climbed the long hallway to the library's entrance, a low arch trimmed in Longmeadow sandstone, the wooden doors hidden to the left of the entrance on the porch. Later, I learned about the Chinese men who dug the railroad using those Ames shovels. But as a child, all I cared about was getting my books. I pushed through the dark doors into the library. It was as quiet as a church and just as mysterious. The one toilet in the cellar required a skeleton key and a walk down a narrow spiral staircase where you were met with the ghostly marble bust of the library's benefactor, Oliver Ames II. Only library staff was allowed to fetch the books from the balcony under the barrel-vaulted ceiling. My library card was a house key to my true home. Well before I was actually an adult, I was allowed to cross the border into the adult section. When I searched the wooden card catalog, I would always go to the drawer with 959.9 of the Dewey Decimal System and read the name of the place I had come from, which no one had ever heard of. The summer before I entered college, I worked as a page in the library and sat at the glass-top desk, dreaming of who I would become. All that time, I had never thought about all the people who had written the books on the library shelves. The adults I knew were doctors, nurses, teachers, and housewives. And yet, almost a quarter century later, I became a writer. I found stories in that Richardson building early in my life and never stopped looking for more. So another thing about librarians is I remember being in the first grade and at Parkview School, and I was really excited because my mother told me that a stork was going to come and bring me a new baby brother. And I told the librarian, and I was like, yeah, a stork is coming to my house and bringing a brother. And so the kind librarian brought me a picture book and said, it was called like Where Babies Come From or something, and she says, you can sit over there and read this book that's, in in an age-appropriate way, scientifically tells you about what happens. And I mean, I was in first grade. I still didn't fully understand, but I did understand that it wasn't a stork at that time. So librarians have been incredibly important to me. And even when I read those passages in the book, I asked librarians for help, and I would be on my own looking for information, sometimes for days, and all I had to do was message a librarian. Like, you can message them at Tufts, there's instant messenger. I mean, I messaged the librarian. She found this information for me in a government document in 30 minutes. It was really fast. Over and over again, it's been proven to me their expertise, their value, and what they can do for you if you're doing any kind of research or you want to find something out. I think curiosity in life is incredibly important. I think, for me at least, it keeps me really engaged and interested in life, being constantly curious about other people, about what's happening, about why something has happened, and books and librarians especially can lead us there and keep that curiosity alive. I'll just read a little bit from just another passage about what it was like to be an immigrant. I'm seeing so many people in this room who made my family's life so easy and made us feel really welcome in this town. We came here, I was 2 years old when we came to the United States, and we lived in Boston, near where my parents worked. They were residents at a hospital downtown, and we lived there, and my father asked around to the other people working at the hospital, what would be a nice town to live in? What would be a good place to raise my children? And they said Easton, and that's why we're there, is because like the reputation of this town is so strong that people recommended we go there. And so that's where my parents bought their house. It was supposed to be a starter house, but it's a lifer house at this point, and it's a place that we don't want to give up at this point. It's our home in this country, and land is, being tied to a piece of land, I've come to realize is so important. And for our family, that land is here in this town, and it's a very important place for us. We've returned to it. All of us have gone on to different states and countries and parts of the country, but we come back to that home. And it may not be modern and fancy, but it is very much important to us and very much our home. And for people especially who I think leave home, which we left the Philippines, creating a sense of home is incredibly important. And I felt really lucky that my home has been here in Easton. People have been so kind to us all the way through. I mean, one of the first memories I have is we moved in from, I think we lived in Jamaica Plain, and we went from there and we pulled into our driveway in Easton, and soon after a station wagon came in, and there was a woman with a basket and a bunch of gifts, and she was literally the welcome wagon. And she knocked on the door, and she had like mac and cheese and bread and peanut butter, like anything. I mean, we hadn't even thought about what we were going to make for dinner, and yet all of it was there in that basket. She had anticipated, or the town, or whoever had organized that, had anticipated what newcomers might need. And that was such a gesture of welcome, and I really appreciated that. And it was one of the ways I came to love this town, was the way that the town showed its welcome and appreciation for us. And I know that we've done the same for the town. My father was practiced ophthalmology here for 30 years, and his patients are in this room, and he was a part of this community. I mean, he's still alive, but he's not practicing right now. He's still a part of his community, but part of the reasons why I think we became part of this community is because we were integrated in so many ways. We went to Immaculate Conception Church. We saw people there. People there became his patients. My teachers went to ICC also. I played soccer. There's just all these ways that I really felt a part of this community. And I hope that we can continue to welcome people and continue the ways for people to feel really woven into the fabric of American life. So I'll read this brief passage, and then I'd love to hear from you and questions and thoughts and things you want to share. Our house was American on the outside, but Filipino on the inside. We left our shoes at the door and wore slippers inside the house. We had an electric rice cooker on the kitchen counter that was never empty of rice. And hanging on the dining room wall, a giant wooden spoon and fork set next to a framed velvet rendition of Da Vinci's Last Supper. If you know Filipinos, you'll see this in all of their homes. Yeah. We had an altar with statues of the Santo Niño, an image of Christ as a child, and the Blessed Virgin Mary, and we would kneel together as a family in front of it to pray the rosary, especially when a relative died. We would pray a novena 9 nights straight for the soul of a recently departed loved one. My favorite line of the prayers was when we said the name of our dead aloud and asked that God would let perpetual light shine upon them. I learned later that our American friends who came over were freaked out by all the faces of Jesus and the saints looking at them from our walls. My brothers, Jerry and Jet, were conceived and born in those first years in the house, a golden, hopeful time in my parents' lives when they worked together to establish my father's ophthalmology practice. There was more than enough room for our growing family, and relatives from the Philippines would stay with us for months. So thank you. I'm going to stop reading there, and I'm going to, would love to hear from you and know you and hear whatever you'd like to share or any questions that you have. But thank you very much for listening and, to me read in my book. Appreciate it. If you prefer audiobook, I did record an audiobook, and it'll be available on July 30th, if you prefer to listen that way. Anybody have questions or anything that you'd like to share? I see so many familiar faces here, even just to like introduce yourself or something. So many people here are important to me. Yes, sir, in the back.
Yes, so in writing Memoir, let me ask, how much did you take out?
A lot. There's a difference, I think, between writing for yourself and doing this work for yourself and then sharing it with the public. And you as the writer, you as the narrator of your work can make that decision, because there are consequences, repercussions, things that may happen by telling your story. And they're real things to think about. I know a lot of writers and artists, and some of them say, like, who cares about anyone else? Just do whatever you want and put the work out there. That works for them. That doesn't really work for me, because I'd like to maintain relationships with people I find important. And so I wouldn't want to get revenge on people or do something in publishing a work that isn't really the point. And I can say that a lot of other things happened to me. I can just say a little bit about like racism. Sometimes the book is described as talking about some of the racist incidents. Some of them, were more like racial microaggressions that I think happen all the time. I didn't really talk about or write about bigger ones because, at least for what I was trying to do in the story, it didn't make sense for the story I was telling. It was too distracting, actually. So there's a difference between writing for yourself and for publication. And all along, there's many steps along the way where you can assess and make those decisions. I was writing about mostly I'm writing about living people, except some people have died. And so once I had the book contract and I knew I was publishing the book, I had a conversation with every family member that I cared to have a conversation with and said, how do you feel about this? I'm writing about this. I'll change your name if you want me to change your name. I won't have any identifying characteristics. I see my brother-in-law over there. He didn't want his name changed. He wanted it to be in there. So
full credit.
Yes, he wanted his name in there. So there's things like that happen as well. But you don't have to do that. If you're an artist or a writer, you don't have to do that. But it just depends. You want to be prepared, because there are things that may happen from putting a story out there. So, but I think there's also a difference between writing and editing. I could not write my book if I thought about what people would think of me or whether they would be mad at me. I actually had to have a lot of privacy internally and just forget about everyone and just hear my own voice and not think about other people. And then I could do that and make the writing. And then in other stages, I could assess and decide, do I want to put that out there or not? I talked to I have a very incredible writing group, and I showed them work, and I said, look, I'm a little bit worried about this. What do you think? And one chapter in the book, a friend who I respect very much said, you know what, I think you're still angry, and I think you're trying to get revenge on the person you're writing about. I don't know that you need to do that. And I thought, you're right. I am just trying to get revenge on that person. That's not right for me to put that in my book. it's not. So I think about those things, but I know some people don't, and they throw things up on the internet, and then they're kind of surprised when they get the feedback that they do. But I knew that it was a very special thing for me to publish a book. I've wanted to be a writer since I was a child. I've been studying how do you become a writer, how do you publish a book, and I've been kind of knocking on that door for many, many years, and I've learned a lot about what gets through and what doesn't get through. And for me, it would take a lot. A lot of people said, I got feedback that said like, well, no, Filipinos don't buy books, Filipinos don't read, who's going to buy your book, people aren't interested, you're not famous enough. These are all things I've heard, and so I knew that if I was going to get the chance to publish a book, I had to really give it everything I could and be incredibly thoughtful about what was in it. So that's kind of long-winded way to answer your question, but I do think there's writing for yourself and writing for public. Yes?
How did you reach a decision on the title?
That is a lucky thing. The only reason this book exists, The Body Papers, is because of a friend of mine named Joanne Diaz. And I was sitting with her in the Philippines. Her husband also had a Fulbright fellowship. And I was complaining, and I was like, I'm never going to publish a book. She has 3 or 4 books at this point. And she looked at me and she's like, you have so many essays that you've published. Put them together in a collection. Call it The Body Papers. All of your essays and your writing has to do with the notion of the body in some way. The body as the church, the body as your body, the body as a woman, the body as an immigrant. She went on and on. She's a poet, so she thinks in these ways, right? She thinks in these like very poetic ways, and she convinced me, and I'm like, all right, I'll try it. So I put my published work together, and I started sending it to contests, because I had heard like, well, an agent's not gonna try to sell your book because you're not famous enough. So I sent it to contests, and within a few months, I got feedback from the contest that I was honorable mention or a finalist. And that made me take a second look and say, I'm getting feedback that there's something to this manuscript. I'm going to work on it for another 6 months or a year. And I did. And then I sent it in to I saw the call for the Restless Books New Immigrant Prize for Writing. And I looked at the description and I was like, that's me. Like, that's definitely me. Wouldn't it be cool if I actually won? And, I sent it in. And as you do as a writer, I just forget about it, because there's so much rejection in writing, at least in my experience, that it doesn't bother me. It's like, well, I just sent it, like I'm going to completely forget it happened. And then I got an email from the publisher that said to call him, and I was like, why is he writing to me? I called my friend. I'm like, I don't know why this guy is writing to me. And my friend said, call him right now. Obviously, you won the contest. Like, why aren't you going to call him? But I'd gone through so many years not believing I would ever publish a book or that my story was interesting to anyone, so it was really, unexpected. And then from there, I revised the book a lot over another year and a half. The manuscript that I turned in that won the contest is not the same book. We had called it an essay collection, then we called it a memoir and essays, and then we worked on it so much that now it's called a memoir. They're all just like slightly different containers for the story. But it is, the title works a lot, especially because I use archival paperwork to help inform the story. And if any of you are interested in writing and writing memoir in particular, I would encourage you to use archives. I used slides, I used report cards. There's probably things that you can find on Ancestry for sure, and just respond. Like, I did an Ancestry search and I found my father's oldest sister's boarding pass for a ship she took to the United States, and I wrote about that. I looked at it, I saw it online, and I just put my timer on for 10 minutes and I started writing about, my father's sister's shipping pass. And then I came across another piece of information, which is that there were 2 children in my father's family who died before the age of 2, and I found the records of them. No one talks about them, and yet on Ancestry there are records that these 2 people lived, although they've been erased from the family history because it's too painful and nobody wants to talk about them. So there's all these ways that you can discover things about yourself or the town you grew up in or whatever it is you want to look at. And I would say, like, take it and then put a timer on for 10 minutes and just write whatever comes to mind. It doesn't matter if it's grammatically correct or what it sounds like. What you're looking for is something that feels alive. And so I got like 2 lines for the book out of that archive, and that's great. That's fine, and was good enough for me. And I was glad to remember those 2 people who died because they did exist, and I'm glad that they're in the book. Judy?
I just want to say thank you.
Oh, thanks.
For having the courage to write that book.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to share with you what it was like to read it.
Yes, please.
So I had to pre-order it when I heard that the book was coming out. But for the audience, I don't know if they know, but of course not, 'cause they don't know me. But I'm actually married to somebody from the Philippines. And we read it out loud.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
And we cried, we laughed, because I could identify the people in the book. And it just was so emotional. I don't know if you as an author know the impact.
Thank you.
And then at one point, I had stopped reading it. It was just, we couldn't read anymore. We had to like close the book. And even though it's a short book, it's so powerful.
Thank you.
So we put the book aside, and then we went on vacation, and I downloaded it on the Kindle.
Thank you.
But I did not read it out loud, and my husband still has not finished the book.
Yeah.
It is just like a window in to Filipino culture that I don't know how you had the words.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, and I'll think about that. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much. Something that has happened along the way is I've been speaking I've been speaking at places since March, so it's all kind of a whirlwind, but I've been going to a few universities, and inevitably a young Asian American woman or Filipino American woman will come up to me to like say hi, and she's friendly and just talk and express her gratitude for the book, and then she'll burst into tears. And then I think people don't realize what they haven't seen until it's right in front of them. I went all through my education until halfway through high school without ever reading a text by a Asian American author. The only depiction I had of Orientals or Asian people were stereotypical depictions. John Steinbeck, Louisa May Alcott. Like, you may not even remember these figures because they're really like side characters, but I paid attention because I'd never seen anybody like me in a book, so I paid attention to them, and they were often comical and stereotypical. And I actually talked to the, well, I won't tell that story because it's being recorded, but it makes a difference to see yourself in literature, and there's room for so many of us in it, and I do really want to encourage people whose stories aren't out there for all kinds of reasons to try. And it might be that there's no writing and making art is like a really privileged thing to be able to do. I don't have children so that I can like work on this. Like, I don't have to worry about paying for college or picking up people from daycare or making people lunches, and like that was kind of a choice I made. There's other reasons why I made the choice too, but one factor is because I have to take care of my art the way I take care of a child. Like, I never expect it's not going to make me money. It's going to actually drain money from me and time, but it's important to me to use my time to do that. There's many times when I wanted to quit, when I felt like no one cares, like I'm getting feedback, like I'm getting rejected so much, obviously people don't care. There's a chapter in this book that no one would publish for years, and my writing group said, why isn't anyone publishing it? I don't understand. And I said, well, I don't understand either. And then my friend said, you know what, I think they're just not brave enough to publish it. And I basically published the same exact thing. I haven't changed it in years, and it's in the book exactly the same. There's no difference. People talk about how much they liked that chapter, but I couldn't get it published anywhere. So, it's a privileged position. I have a sense of what that is, and so I keep going. Like, even when I think like, oh, no one cares, I can't go on, I think, well, I've gotten this far, which is far, and a lot of people, it must be even harder for them to get anywhere if I can't even get anywhere. So I'm going to keep forging ahead and like making a path so that other people can walk down that path behind me and make it a little bit easier for them somehow. And I hope I've been able to do that for folks, at least to tell them that their story is important. It doesn't have to be that you're a person of color or an immigrant or an Asian American or have survived assault or whatever it is, but I'm sure there's a way that you've experienced the world in a unique way that no one else has heard about, and I think it's important to share those stories in those moments. And there's ways to do it. There's something called stories from the stage. There's the moth. There's like all these ways, if you don't feel like you're a writer, to get out stories. There's StoryCorps, where regular people, loved ones, interview each other, and then it's archived at the Library of Congress. Why should only like privileged, wealthy, educated, lucky people get to preserve their stories? Everyday people, their stories are also very important, because that's what this world is. Like it's us. It's not just the people who've won the elections or the richest or the heads of companies, but they often get their stories out there. Even their pets do. FYI, they do. I don't know how many pet books written by the pets of presidents there are, but there are. Think about that. When you think about your story is not important, well, someone's animal wrote a story. Anything else? I know this room is warm. Yes?
Hi. I also want to thank you as someone who grew up Filipino in Easton as well. I actually met your sister. This is like crazy. I met your sister like a couple days ago. And she told me about this event. And yeah, I don't know if I'm gonna be that Asian American girl that like says, I mean, I don't want to cry. I think
don't cry.
Like, yeah. Because I was tearing up when you kept saying that, because it is incredible. I mean, to see you and to see people like the hosts of Long Distance Radio, who and Self-Evident, to like be up, like on the in the mainstream. And so I wanted to ask, what part of because I haven't had a chance to read your book yet. I just thought you were a fan. But what part of the Filipino culture was most impactful in your upbringing that you would think, or that you would have wanted readers to take the most from your writing?
There's something about family, and it doesn't mean blood. Your family or your kinship network is people you've invited in. And Filipinos, I mean, I don't know if you know Filipinos, but there's something about family that is just so important. Like my niece had referenced, like that I'll fly across the country to see them. My mother will do the same thing. Like there's something about, I mean, and we're privileged enough to have, be able to do that for each other. So there's that kind of thing. I also think about overseas workers. I mean, those people, maybe there's some here, some of them, they basically live their whole lives somewhere else, and someone else takes care of their children so that they can give their children a better life. And that access to the better life is economic. And so there's this theory called chains of love that Rosal Pereñas came up with, which is that women here or in Europe and other places, they go to work, and that's great. But how do they go to work? They have to hire somebody to take care of their kids while they go to work, and then that person is sometimes a Filipina, and so that Filipina has had to hire someone else to watch her children 24/7 and kind of be the mom and father for their children, and that is a form of love. I mean, it's a sacrifice. Who doesn't want to be with their children all the time? And yet they can't, because they are going to raise money, because the economic system is what it is in the Philippines, that the best way that they can care for their family is to leave them, which is, a heartbreaking thing. Jason DeParle is actually coming out with a book in August, I think. He's a journalist. He's not Filipino, but he's wrote a piece about a good parent is one who leaves. I think that's the article, and he turned it into a book that'll come out in August. But that incredible sacrifice for family is something that I've witnessed Filipinos do, and it's also there's data about it. I think the gross domestic product, I think overseas remittances is actually the biggest. That's what does that mean to have a country where everyone leaves in order to make money? It's like something is not working correctly. I don't think you want your people to be in the country and stay. And you become going back to the notion of family, people, the workers make other people their family as well. They bring that, and I think that's why people, besides the English language skills, having Filipinos as caretakers, nurses, elder care, and other things like that, and teachers even, there's this care that Filipinos bring to their work, I think, that stands out, and why people enjoy having Filipino workers. So that is this way of and I do the same thing. I teach college, and for many years I was teaching first-year students, and they're making this transition from high school to college, and in that first semester, I love teaching first first semester, first-year students. Some people don't like it. I think it's this really important bridge where they may get there and decide it's really unfriendly and leave. People do that. But I really see my students, and I tell them this, I see them as like, how would I want people to treat my nieces and nephews if they showed up in a college classroom scared, it's like an elite institution, they don't think they belong there, how would I want their professor to treat them? That's how I treat them. My niece asked me once, she's like, do all professors go out with their students and bring them to dinner? And I'm like, I don't think so, but if a student wants me to go to dinner with my family or something, I'll do it, because a lot of the students that at least have found me at Tufts campus are first generation to college students, and some of them are going to drop out. They'll tell me, and I'll ask them, I'll say, can you just hold on one more day? Here's some resources. Can you get through the weekend? This is an incredibly well-resourced place. Can you just try to stay in a little bit longer, and here's some support for you. Once they get through that first semester, I think they can get through the rest of the 4 years, but it is a really rocky first initiation into college. So, yeah, so I think of them as family.
Do we have any more questions?
Sir.
So does the concept of colonialism play a part in your writing?
Yeah, I think about it. I don't know. There's many more people who've studied it, more than I have, and can say a lot more about it, but colonialism is really interesting to me, yes. There's my ancestors lived in colonies. First, the Spanish. I have grandparents, great-grandparents who were colonized people of Spain, and then the United States, and then Japan, and then the United States again, and then they were independent. And so I come from a long history of people who were colonized people, and then we ask ourselves, what does that mean to be a colonized person and to be in a country where you're forced to learn a language, they're forced to learn Japanese, and things like that, under violence, threat of violence. What does that mean to your idea about freedom and liberty? This is more has to do more with traffic and pollution, but whenever I'm in the Philippines and I come back here, I really do feel free, I have to tell you. Some of it's because I can move around in space freely, I can get in my car and drive and not be in traffic for 6 hours or something, and some of it's the air I breathe because I can breathe freely. I do feel a sense of freedom here, I can say that. There's that horrible rhetoric about go back to where you came from, but there is something here, as much as there's criticism about what's going on in the U.S., there is something here that feels special and different and freedom to me, and that's why we're here. Mrs. Boyle?
I have a comment.
Okay, sure.
I want to applaud you and thank you so much for the section of your book that dealt with your depression.
Oh, thank you.
And the struggle that you so clearly described and brought me to tears as I was reading it.
Thank you.
For more reasons than one.
Yes.
But you've come out on the other side.
Yeah.
And I would love to see your work be required reading for any high school senior going on to experience that terror of being in a university setting where he or she feels overwhelmed and so forth.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing so much with the world.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah. I want to remember Jimmy and remember your son. And Jimmy and I grew up together and went to school together, Jimmy Shine, that's how I thought of him. And when I was at Tufts working on this book, I would run into Jimmy at the gym or at Whole Foods or on the street. And my husband Alonzo there ran with him for the marathon team for a little bit. And we talked about writing because he was working on his dissertation, which is also this long,
He mentioned you very frequently.
Yeah, and so he would tell me, he's like, you got to write this. And I would tell him different things I was working on. We'd run into each other, and he would encourage me to do it. So he was part of that journey as well, and I appreciate that very much. So thank you. Yeah.
I was just going to say very much the same thing, but this is on your journey with dealing with the breast cancer and the cancer in your family. So that was, it was very eye-opening and very honest and so relatable. So many pieces of your book are completely relatable. So anyway, it was beautiful piece of writing.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I joked with my friend that when people ask me what I should have titled the book, I should have titled it Everything I Never Told You, because it's about a lot of different things, but really it's about things I just never talked about. In breast cancer, the BRCA gene mutation, my decisions I had to make about prophylactic surgery was one of them. And I can say that writing something that someone else wrote made my journey easier. People were kind of giving me a hard time. Why would you have prophylactic surgery, mastectomy, when you don't have cancer? And then a woman was featured in the New York Times front page. She's a physician herself, and it was her journey about why she decided to do the same thing. It came out a month before my mastectomy. Everyone laid off after that. They left me alone, and they didn't give me a hard time after they saw her story. So I understand what it means to share a story and why, at the risk of your own embarrassment or whatever, why it can be helpful to someone else to tell that story. And I encourage you to do it too, to think about what's a story that I wish I could tell my parents or my children or my friend, and why not tell it now, or if it's safe enough to tell it now, so that it's not something you regret or that you tell at, unfortunately, like a memorial or something, rather than like letting that person enjoy that story now. Yes.
Just yesterday, a little something happened, and today, earlier, when you were speaking about finding your voice so you can speak your narrative, take control of the narrative, reminded me of yesterday. I was speaking with my adult daughter on the phone, and I started to tell her some personal things, and I said, Kimmy, I can't believe I'm telling you this. So I told her some things about me that I just felt might have been inappropriate. She said, Mom, there's nothing wrong with you telling me this. This is fine.
Yeah.
And I felt empowered, and that's the thing. If I don't tell my narrative, someone else will have the control and fill in the blanks that might not be real.
Right, and she's hearing it from you and seeing how brave you are. You know, it's a risk to tell that story, and she's encouraging you and maybe even wanting to know more about your life.
Right, so coming here just reinforced that. So thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to reading the book.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Is that just one question?
Yes.
With all the stories you've told, and it must have been, so cathartic. Do you feel hollowed out at this point? Do you feel another story coming out?
Oh no, I have another story I want to write. I'm not going to do a memoir. I'm not going to write another memoir, I don't think. There's no need to. I did everything. I told everything I wanted to tell is in this book, but I'm going to try working on fiction. I'm very interested in refugees right now, and the Philippines took in 1,300 Jewish refugees before World War II. It's a story that we don't hear about, especially, so I'm interested in that. What does it mean for the Philippines to have done that? So, thank you so much, everybody, for being here.